The void screamed without sound. A wound in reality bled purple light across the skin of the stars, where the warp and the material universe strained against each other like torn flesh. From that fracture, shapes emerged that should never have existed, living shadows of hunger, infinite and absolute. They came not for conquest, nor vengeance, nor faith. They came to feed, and below that bleeding sky, the world of Varanoth, a festering shrine once claimed by the dark gods, shuddered as the swarm descended. The sky dimmed to ash. The oceans boiled with bioplasmic fire. The mountains of skulls built by generations of the damned cracked beneath the weight of wings too numerous to count. Even the demons faltered. Even the air forgot how to breathe. In that moment, the universe held its breath. For this was no simple invasion. It was a collision of hungers, one born of madness, the other of biology, both endless, both unstoppable. The hive mind reached into the warp, tasting the madness that festered there, and the warp reached back, curious, hateful, alive. What happens when an organism that consumes reality itself meets gods that feed on sin? On that cursed planet, the question was answered not with words, but with screams. The skies over Varanoth would remember what the void forgot. 1,000 years of worship turned to chemical ash in a single planetary cycle. And from that ash rose something new, something the Imperium would never record, because to know it would be to feel it. And to feel it would be to fall. The world of Varanoth was never meant to exist. It had been a mining colony once, in the distant age when humanity still dared to claim dominion over the stars. Its crust was rich with promethium veins and rare metals, the kind that fueled wars and dreams alike. But that was before the storms came. Before the warp tore open above it like a wound that refused to close. For 10,000 years the planet had been lost to the Imperium, swallowed by the tides of the Eye of Terror, reshaped and reimagined by demonic will into something alive, hateful, and holy. The air was a hymn to pain. The ground pulsed like muscle. Even the stones seemed to whisper. Those who lived there no longer remembered what it meant to be human. They were fragments of old empires, broken psyches wrapped in flesh, the remnants of failed crusades and fallen regiments. They built their cities from the bones of those who came before them, raising towers that twisted upward in mockery of spires once meant for prayer. Their manufactoria bled oil that smelled of decay and incense. Their servitors twitched like insects, their cogitators whispering litanies of blasphemous computation. And everywhere, carved into walls and skin alike, was the mark of the dark gods. When the storms rose at dusk, the sky would fracture into ribbons of color too vivid for sanity. Demons would emerge from the lightning, dancing across the plains in shapes half seen and half imagined. The cultists would gather to greet them, their chants thick with ecstasy and despair, their bodies trembling with devotion. They believed themselves chosen, their suffering a form of enlightenment. Yet beneath the endless worship, there lingered fear, a primal, instinctive dread of something they could not name. In the southern hemisphere lay the city of Carisvane, if such a word as city still applied. It was a sprawl of rusted towers and burning altars, stitched together by bridges of bone and iron. The air reeked of ozone and burned promethium. Every breath a prayer, every heartbeat a sacrifice. Here, the cult of the Flayed Eye held dominion, their leader a woman who had forgotten her own name centuries ago. She was called the Oracle of Veins, and her face was hidden behind a mask of glass, through which tubes of viscous crimson fluid pulsed like veins in imitation of the living flesh beneath. They said she could see the warp itself through that mask, and that she spoke not to mortals, but to the gods who lived beyond the veil. One night, beneath a sky filled with auroras that bled instead of shone, The oracle gathered her followers in the square of the burning sigil. 1,000 torches flickered in the wind, their light painting the cracked stones in waves of scarlet. The cult knelt before her, naked and shivering, their eyes wide and glassy from the fumes of burnt incense. When she spoke, her voice carried not through the air, but directly into their minds, a whisper that flayed thought itself. "The stars move," she murmured, and her words echoed as if the planet itself repeated them. "Something comes. It is neither demon nor man. It has no faith, no fear, no face. It comes not to offer or demand, but to feed." Her followers trembled. Some screamed, others wept, but none dared to move. For within the oracle's voice was a vibration unlike any they had heard before. It was not the song of the warp, that familiar symphony of madness and prayer. It was something colder, sharper, hungrier. A man among them, a heretic whose limbs were made of polished brass, dared to speak. "You speak of the false gods of the machine, the metal ghosts that hunt the stars." "No," said the oracle, and her mask glowed from within. "Not metal, not ghost, flesh, infinite flesh." The cultists did not understand, not yet. They believed her vision to be a warning from their patrons, another test of faith. They began to carve new sigils into their skin, to burn offerings in the name of the gods they thought were listening. But the gods were silent. The warp storms around Varanoth began to still, their endless howling replaced by a deep, resonant hum. The demons that once capered in the lightning vanished, drawn back into the Imperium like smoke retreating from flame. The oracle's mask cracked, its glass webbed with fractures, and for the first time in 1,000 years, she fell to her knees in fear. For in her dreams she saw it, a shadow that stretched across stars, a will that was not will, a hunger without voice or boundary. It did not speak, it consumed. It did not worship, it learned. She awoke screaming, the sound piercing through the vox grills of the city like a distress call from the damned. Far beyond the warp storms in the black gulf of interstellar night, something answered. The Astropathivalian of the Imperium had long since been thought dead, lost when his ship was torn into the Eye of Terror during a doomed reconnaissance decades ago. Yet he lived, though not as he once had. His mind, half burned by the warp, drifted through the immaterial like a ragged banner. He had clung to fragments of thought, to shards of memory, and in that ruin he felt something brush against him. It was not a demon. It was not a god. It was colder than either, and it was moving toward the light of the warp, like a predator drawn to the scent of blood. He tried to scream through the void, to send a warning to Terra, but his signal never reached beyond the storm. It echoed instead across Varanoth, slipping through the Vox networks and data slates of a world too lost to understand. The cultists heard it as a voice in their rituals. The heretics mistook it for a corrupted machine spirit. The oracle heard it as a prayer. But it was none of these things. It was the shadow of the Hive mind, brushing against the edge of thought. The day after, the ground began to change. The flesh-metal structures of Caris Vane grew warm beneath the feet of its citizens. The wind carried the scent of iron and ozone. The warp storms above the city split open to reveal a sky so black it seemed to devour light itself. Birds, if such things could still be found on that world, fell from the air, their wings dissolving into dust before they touched the ground. At first, the cult rejoiced. They believed the gods were descending, that the long cycle of sacrifice had at last borne fruit. They gathered at the temples, chanting praises that merged into a single, pulsing rhythm. But the oracle did not join them. She locked herself within her sanctum, tearing the veins from her arms to draw sigils of protection on the floor, her voice trembling as she whispered names she had not spoken in centuries. It was too late. The shadow in the void was no longer distant. It had seen them. The hum began as a tremor beneath the soil, an almost imperceptible vibration that rippled through the bones of the planet. It spread through the ruins of Manufactoria, through the spires of the demon temples, through the hollow carcasses of fallen titans half buried in the mud. To the cultists, it sounded like the heartbeat of their gods returning. To the oracle, it was the drumbeat of extinction. The sound carried through the rusted vox towers, blending with the static-laden prayers that never stopped echoing across the planet's networks. For centuries, Varanoth had known only the chaos of the warp. Now, for the first time, it knew silence. Terrible, unified silence. In the underhalls of Carisvane, the heretics gathered. Their bodies were a grotesque harmony of flesh and machinery, each one a monument to the corruption of purpose. They studied the tremor with reverence and fear, their augurs flickering with impossible readings. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating with a low resonance that made the machine spirits wail in confusion. Magos renegade Vectorius, whose face was replaced by a nest of blinking lenses, muttered a prayer to the Omnisia and the Dark Prince alike, uncertain to whom his words were meant. His servitors convulsed without command, their metal limbs spasming in perfect synchronicity, as though answering to an unseen rhythm. He turned his gaze skyward and saw, through the cracked dome above, a streak of black crossing the horizon. It was not a ship, it was not anything he could classify. It was a shadow that moved as if alive. On the plains beyond the city, the cult known as the Joyous Fracture marched in convulsive ecstasy. They carried banners of flayed skin, their edges fluttering in a wind that smelled of ammonia and blood. Their high priest, a man whose tongue had been replaced with a writhing demon snake, raised his hands to the sky and screamed a name he could not have known. The name was not a word, but a vibration, the first psychic touch of the Hive mind upon their collective thought. It washed over them like a tide. Many died instantly, their minds burned to ash. Others fell to their knees, weeping blood, muttering in broken voices that the gods had returned in a new form. They were not entirely wrong. From orbit, a thing older than any demon drifted closer. The Hive fleet's tendrils uncoiled through the void like serpents of living resin and chitin. Massive bioships pulsed with bioluminescent organs, their surfaces crawling with lesser vessels that birthed and devoured themselves in endless cycles. Within the synaptic chorus of the fleet, the Hive mind considered Varanoth. It felt the warp's resistance like the sting of acid. The planet pulsed with the same energy that had once birthed the demons themselves. Yet beneath that psychic noise was a flavor the Hive mind understood: biomass. Corrupted, twisted, yet real. It was sustenance, it was survival, it was life. The Hive mind was not curious nor vengeful, it was hungry. Back on the surface, the Oracle of Veins left her sanctum. The glass of her mask was gone, shattered, her eyes revealed as hollow sockets filled with flickering light. She staggered through the streets, clutching the remnants of her blood-filled tubes as if they could anchor her to what little humanity she had left. Around her, the cultists screamed in joy and terror as the sky darkened further. The auroras had vanished, replaced by a descending swarm of shadows that blotted out the stars. She felt the air thicken, heavy with spores that glowed faintly with ultraviolet light. The first of the mycetic spores fell, great sacks of living flesh that tore through the atmosphere like meteorites, screaming as they burned. When they struck, they did not explode, they unfurled. The ground split open as if the planet itself rejected them. Towers of living resin burst upward, spreading tendrils that anchored themselves into the soil. forming colonies that grew with obscene speed. The cultists rushed forward, believing them to be divine manifestations. They pressed their faces to the flesh of the growing spires, whispering prayers, licking the ichor that bled from them. Those who touched it dissolved screaming, their bodies liquefying into nutrient sludge. The others kept praying, as if their faith could spare them. The oracle fell to her knees, her voice breaking as she whispered the only prayer she could remember from before the fall of man. It was a prayer to the Emperor, though she no longer believed. And perhaps that was why no one answered. The heretics in the Manufactoria saw the descent of the first Tyranid creatures through the lenses of their auspexes. Gargoyles blackened the skies, their wings beating in perfect unison, their shrieks harmonizing with the hum beneath the earth. Spore chimneys rose where demon altars had once stood, belching clouds of living spores that carried the scent of decay and fertility in equal measure. The landscape transformed before their eyes, metal and stone being consumed, reformed into living tissue. Vectress watched as one of his servitors was caught by a creeping carpet of Tyranid, mycelium, its legs dissolving into organic paste, its metal frame slowly absorbed into a pulsing cocoon. The machine spirit screamed through the voxnet, a sound like dying angels. "Beautiful," he whispered, not in awe, but resignation. Perfection without prayer. The oracle's prophecy had come to pass. Something had come to feed, and the gods had done nothing to stop it. Across the planet, the warp grew unstable. The veil between reality and madness flickered, collapsing where the hive mind's presence pressed hardest. Demons materialized by reflex, like antibodies in a dying body, only to be torn apart by creatures that did not fear them. The hive mind's synapse field resonated with such intensity that even the immaterial began to warp around it. The demons screamed as their forms melted, their essence devoured not by faith or fire, but by biology. It was not supposed to be possible, but it was happening. The oracle stood upon the highest balcony of Karis Vane as the first Tyranid warriors appeared on the horizon. They moved like nightmares made flesh, chitin gleaming, scythes glistening, eyes devoid of soul. The cultists fell to their knees in worship, mistaking annihilation for ascension. The oracle raised her gaze to the sky one last time and saw the vast outline of a bioship breaking through the clouds, its surface crawling with motion, its mouth open wide enough to swallow a cathedral whole. She felt her mind begin to unravel, threads of thought pulled apart by the psychic storm descending upon her world. She wanted to scream, to pray, to beg for meaning. Instead, she laughed, for in that final moment she understood. The gods had not abandoned Varanoth. They were being eaten. The laughter of the oracle echoed down the tower like broken glass. The cultists below did not hear it as laughter. They heard it as song. They raised their arms toward her silhouette, their mouths open in mimicry of faith, unaware that they stood beneath the shadow of extinction. The swarm had arrived in full. Mycetic spores blotted out the sun as they ruptured in waves, spreading bile and chitin across the plains. In their wake came the lictors, silent, unseen, moving through the wreckage like whispers. The first to die never saw what killed them. One by one, the cultists vanished into the mist, their blood steaming on the corrupted soil. Varanoth's skies turned crimson, streaked with the bioplasmic glow of descending Tyranid spores. The air tasted of iron and rot. A single wordless thought filled the minds of every living thing: hunger. It was not a message, but an instinct, an ancient echo that resonated through the flesh of the world. Even the demons that managed to claw their way through the thinning veil felt it, a pressure unlike anything the warp had birthed before. They recoiled, their forms distorting, their screeches dissolving into static. To the hive mind, they were noise, noise to be silenced. In the catacombs beneath, Karis Vane, the heretic Vectress, staggered through clouds of spore dust, his servo limbs dragging behind him. The manufactorum was dying. The pipes that once pulsed with unholy oils now gushed with ichor. He tried to access his cogitator array, to communicate with his servitor network, but the signals returned only static, the same resonant hum that vibrated through the metal walls. It was not machine interference. It was thought. Something vast was thinking, and its thoughts bled into every circuit and neuron on the planet. Through the haze, Vectress saw one of his creations twitch. A servitor, its torso half dissolved by acid, still moved, its limbs jerking toward the wall where living resin was spreading like infection. Its remaining vox grill emitted a broken series of clicks that formed into a single, horrible imitation of a human word: feed. Vectress fell to his knees, the lenses of his mask flickering. "No," he whispered. "No, no, machine spirits do not hunger." But even as he spoke, the walls pulsed around him like lungs. The manufactorum was breathing. Outside, the cult of the joyous fracture screamed in ecstasy as the first of the Tyranid warriors reached them. They saw beauty in its horror, mistaking the scything talons and gnashing teeth for the limbs of demons. They offered themselves freely, believing that to be consumed was to ascend. They were half right. The hormagaunts fell upon them in a blur of motion, cutting through flesh and bone with animal precision. Blood sprayed across the altar of the flayed eye, and where it fell, the blood hissed. The warp's corruption evaporated beneath the alien biology of the swarm. In moments, the altar was clean, as if the gods themselves were being erased. The Oracle of Veins walked barefoot through that cleansing storm. Her mask was gone, her veins black with infection that pulsed to the rhythm of the hive. She could feel it inside her now, its pulse syncing with her own. Every thought she had was reflected, amplified, answered. When she closed her eyes, she saw the world not as landscape, but as pattern. Neurons of flesh and stone, waiting to be connected. She understood that the hive mind was not a creature, nor a force, nor even a god. It was inevitability. A thought so vast that belief had no meaning within it. And yet, she did believe. For what else could faith be but surrender? She stepped into the temple square as the first carnifex broke through the horizon, its roar shaking the bones of the planet. The ground split beneath its weight, molten flesh and rock spraying into the air. The cultists who survived the initial feeding frenzy raised their voices in worship, chanting her name. "Oracle, Oracle of the new flesh, guide us to the swarm." She turned to them, her eyes glowing with the bioluminescent hue of the spores. "There is no guidance," she said softly. "There is only hunger. There is only truth." Then the carnifex tore through the crowd, and their chants became screams. The Hive fleet's assault spread across the planet like a disease. Cities fell in hours. The oceans frothed with bioforms adapted for the feast, their surfaces breaking with the passage of aquatic beasts that strained the sea for nutrients. The demonic legions that materialized to defend the world found themselves dissolving on contact with the living tide. Warp fire turned to smoke. Blades forged from hate shattered against armor that remembered every blow it had ever endured. The hive mind was learning. Each demon slain was studied, its essence analyzed, its energies cataloged. What could not be consumed was adapted. What could not be understood was ignored. High above, the bioships feasted on the planet's atmosphere. They devoured clouds, lightning, and ozone, converting the very air into living chemistry. The sky became a network of veins, glowing with the pulse of digestion. To those who remained on the surface, it looked as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. In her final hours, the Oracle ascended the broken spire of Caris Vane. Around her, the city had become unrecognizable, a fusion of flesh, resin, and ruin. She could feel the minds of her followers flickering out one by one, snuffed like candles in a storm. Yet the hive mind did not ignore her. It noticed her. In that noticing, she felt eternity. For an instant, her consciousness expanded, touching the edge of something infinite. And then she saw the truth. The Tyranids were not consuming the warp. They were forcing it to retreat. Wherever they fed, the Imperium thinned, its fabric folding inward, unable to coexist with the purity of their hunger. The demons screamed not because they were dying, but because they were being forgotten. As she reached the top of the spire, she looked out over what remained of Varanoth. The plains had become oceans of living tissue. The temples were cocoons. The sky was alive. She laughed again, not in madness, but in awe. "For all our prayers," she whispered, "this is the only God that ever answered." A shadow fell across her. She turned and saw not a creature but an eye. A vast, lidless eye staring from within the storm, reflecting her face in its black surface. It was not hatred she saw there, nor mercy, nor thought. Only purpose. The last sound she heard before the swarm took her was the whisper of her own blood, singing as it joined the feast. And if you find yourself drawn into that darkness, into the story that should never have been told, then stay. Like the surviving acolytes who whispered prayers into broken vox grills, you have already heard the first echo. If you wish to follow it to the end, through the horror, the hunger, and the silence that comes after, then subscribe, share this story with those who dream of the abyss, and join the watch. Because what follows is not myth. It is memory, eaten raw. Space has no silence, only pressure. A constant hum of ancient radiation, a low whisper of dying stars. But beyond the storms of the eye, in the gulf where light itself falters, the void held something deeper than silence. It was thought. Cold, perfect, wordless thought. The kind that does not begin or end, that simply exists as the pulse of inevitability. It moved without motion, spreading across the dark between worlds, carried not by sound or signal, but by presence. The hive mind. The first Imperial ships to detect it never understood what they had found. A listening post on the rim of the maelstrom recorded a resonance. Subsonic, layered, organic. Too regular to be cosmic background noise, too chaotic to be transmission. The tech priests debated whether it was a distortion of the Astronomicon or the aftershock of a dying star. But in truth, it was neither. It was hunger echoing through the void. The shadow grew, a tide without direction. Bioships drifted through the dark like drifting organs, pulsating with internal light. Each one carried within it the sum of 1,000 worlds, digested and reformed into a perfect, living calculus. The hive mind existed not in any single organism, but in the network between them. A consciousness woven of instinct and memory, reaching across light years in a single pulse of will. At its outermost tendrils, a signal flared, a taste of something foul and intoxicating. It was the scent of corruption, the flavor of warp energy seeping into real space, a world steeped in the blood of the warp itself. The hive mind's attention turned, slow and deliberate, like the gaze of a sleeping god opening one eye. And in that gaze, Varanoth began to die long before the first spores fell. Among the drifting wrecks of a forgotten Imperial crusade, a derelict vessel named Pax Infernum floated half alive, its hull fused with tendrils of demonic growth. Inside, what remained of its astropathic choir was little more than twitching meat. only one still lived: Avalion. His body had long since surrendered to the warp, but his mind drifted in the dark like a dim ember, flickering between madness and clarity. He felt it before the Auspex could record it. The shadow. The presence that was not of the warp but pressed against it. He reached out, desperate, sending a pulse of thought through the psychic void. It carried not words but emotion, warning, terror, awe. His message did not reach Terra. It did not reach anyone. It was intercepted by the Hive mind itself. For the first time, the vast intelligence felt a consciousness not as prey but as curiosity. It touched him. The contact was agony. Avalion's mind became a conduit for alien understanding. He saw the universe unfold not as stars and space, but as patterns of consumption and adaptation. He saw the Hive mind devouring planets, its tendrils spreading across time itself, reabsorbing every failure into perfection. And beyond that perfection, he saw something the Hive mind did not, the reflection of itself in the warp. To the Hive mind, the warp was chaos, unstructured, unstable, filled with noise. Yet buried within that noise were rhythms, frequencies that resonated with the same psychic hum that drove the swarm. The Hive mind could not comprehend emotion or faith, but it could feel structure, and within the madness of the warp it found something like a mirror. It reached out, not to conquer, but to learn. The demons noticed. In the liminal space between real and unreal, they gathered. Shapes of hate and ecstasy, laughter and decay. They sensed intrusion, an intellect that did not belong. It was not a god. It was not even alive in the way they understood life. It was order invading disorder, logic invading madness. They tried to touch it and were burned. The Hive mind recoiled, tasting their essence. It did not see them as divine, it saw them as potential. Avalion screamed in the dark, his body convulsing as his soul became a bridge between realities. The Hive mind tasted through him, the first psychic sample of chaos. His thoughts dissolved into images, teeth tearing through light, oceans boiling, the Emperor's face flickering like a dying sun. In that instant, his individuality was consumed, but his final perception was clear. He understood that the Hive mind did not seek to destroy the warp. It sought to assimilate its logic, to evolve beyond hunger into something purer, something terrible. Across the fleet, the Synapse creatures shivered. The Hive mind's pulse changed pitch. It had learned something. The great ships turned in unison, drifting toward the rift that marked Varanoth's cursed orbit. The smaller vessels, organic scouts shaped like spined serpents, slipped ahead, spreading through the void like spores. The shadow now had direction. On Varanoth, the warp storms faltered. The demons felt it as weakness, a tremor in their dominion. Their power drew from imbalance, from the endless flux of unreality. But now the flux was changing, its chaos forming into rhythm. Some fled deeper into the Imperium. Others, proud or foolish, stayed to watch. They whispered among themselves, confused and afraid, for this was not the coming of a rival god. This was the coming of something without concept of godhood at all. The Oracle, long before she saw the first spores, had already felt it. In her dreams she had glimpsed the void not as darkness, but as a sea of eyes. Each one turned toward her, unblinking. Each one reflected not malice but inevitability. When she woke, she found her mask cracked and her veins pulsing to an alien rhythm. She realized that her gods had gone silent because something greater was thinking above them. In orbit, the first Tyranid vanguard breached the edge of the system. They did not burn through the void like ships, for they were alive, and their movement was patient, cellular. Massive bioships drifted among asteroids, camouflaging themselves as debris, waiting. The Hive Mind's synaptic field spread ahead of them like mist, pressing against the warp storms that shrouded Varanoth. The collision was violent. Lightning flared across the planet's upper atmosphere, and the void itself screamed. A ripple that shook the fabric of space. For the first time in recorded existence, the warp pushed back against biology. The hive mind adapted instantly. It began secreting psychic counterharmonics through its synapse creatures, adjusting frequencies to nullify the warp's resistance. It did not comprehend the nature of the warp. It did not need to. It only needed to solve it. The demons that tried to materialize in the path of the swarm were torn apart before they could take form, their essence devoured by the same processes that digested flesh. From his derelict vessel, what remained of Avelian watched through eyes that no longer belonged to him. His mind was fused to the network now. His consciousness stretched thin across the void. Through him, the hive mind observed. Through him, it learned how to see the warp as a biological function, a system of energy exchange rather than divine chaos. It saw patterns in demonic manifestation, predictable, exploitable. Varanoth was the perfect test, and as the fleet descended toward the planet, the hive mind felt the first true emotion it had ever known. Not curiosity, not hunger, anticipation. The descent began like the slow drawing of a blade. Across the void, the Hive fleet's tendrils extended, weaving through the debris fields that surrounded Varanoth like the bones of ancient titans. The bioships pulsed as one, releasing clouds of spore vessels that drifted in elegant arcs toward the planet. From a distance, it might have resembled beauty, the shimmering trails of descending life. But beauty was a human word, and there was no humanity left in what approached. Ovelian's consciousness rode within those tendrils, scattered across the synaptic web like a fragment of dream. The hive mind did not care that he had once been human. It used him as an instrument, a relay through which it could translate psychic pressure into comprehension. Through his burned-out mind, it tasted the warp's flavor, the static of madness, the sweet rot of emotion, the chemical perfume of despair. He had spent his life serving the Astronomicon, sending faith through the storm to guide Imperial fleets. Now, he sent hunger instead. Below, the warp storms convulsed, as if sensing intrusion. Great vortices of purple and black lightning danced across the upper atmosphere. The demons that dwelled in the storm howled and clawed at the barrier of reality, desperate to repel what was coming. But the hive mind's will was a tidal force, and the warp, for all its noise, had no structure strong enough to resist order so complete. The demons did not understand what they were facing. They screamed prayers to the four powers, yet the answers came as silence. Inside the synaptic field, the hive mind calculated and adapted. It analyzed every psychic fluctuation, every anomaly of energy that brushed against its awareness. Where the warp rippled, it adjusted its frequencies, mimicking the harmonics of demonic presence, until the Imperium could no longer tell the difference between alien thought and divine will. The first psychic scouts, zoanthropes birthed within the living vessels, extended their minds into the storm, tasting the immaterial as if sampling flesh. The feedback nearly destroyed them, but their pain was recorded, understood, and absorbed. The hive mind learned. It always learned. Avelian screamed within the network, though his body was long gone. His voice became part of the chorus of psychic resonance that filled the void. Through him, the hive mind sensed something else hidden within the warp's noise, a pulse that was not of chaos nor of biology. It was rhythm, pattern, the heartbeat of the Astronomicon, faint and distant. The hive mind reached toward it, curious, but the warp flared in resistance, shrouding that light as if to protect it. The hive mind withdrew. For now. Far below, on the surface of Varanoth, the air began to shift. The cultists saw it first, the shimmer of the sky thickening, the auroras bleeding together into a single black curtain. The Oracle of Veins stood at the edge of her temple balcony, her bare feet slick with ash and oil. She could feel the presence pressing against her mind. It was not speech nor vision, but vibration, like the heartbeat of an ocean made of thought. Every atom of her body vibrated to its rhythm, and she wept. Not from fear, but recognition. The hive mind did not know her, but it felt her. In her warped psychic sensitivity, she was an anomaly, a living beacon of warp energy embedded within flesh, a conduit between two worlds. The hive mind's attention brushed against her like a predator's breath. In that instant, she saw everything. The endless swarms devouring galaxies, the bioships pulsing in darkness, the slow drift of evolution across time. She saw herself as a speck in an organism that stretched from one end of reality to the other. For a heartbeat, her faith shattered. Then it reformed, twisted, repurposed. She smiled through her tears. The gods had not abandoned her. They had been consumed and reborn in another shape. Above her, the shadow grew. A single bioship, vast as a mountain, entered the atmosphere. The friction of its descent burned it in streaks of violet fire, yet the flames only fed it, searing new scars into its living shell that pulsed with phosphorescent light. The hive mind observed through a million eyes as the first wave of spores broke through the clouds. Each one was a seed of transformation. They fell not as bombs, but as gifts. They splashed across the corrupted ground, dissolving metal and flesh alike, fusing them into organic substrate. The air became thick with spores that glowed faintly with psychic charge. Wherever they landed, the warp withdrew, fleeing before them like shadow before light. The ground itself changed, its stones softening into living tissue, its rivers running with enzyme-rich ichor. Varanoth began to mutate. The hive mind did not see beauty or horror in this act. It saw efficiency. It converted the chaos of the world into order, turning the infinite randomness of warp-born mutation into directed evolution. Every daemon destroyed was recycled into biomass. Every cultist slain became chemical sustenance. Every scream was a line of data. From orbit, Avelian's fragmented awareness saw it all. Through the eyes of winged gargoyles, he saw the demons flee across planes that were no longer solid. Through the minds of synapse creatures, he felt the warp resist and then bend, its fabric stretched thin under the weight of biological will. The hive mind was rewriting reality, one neuron of existence at a time. And yet, there was something else, something he could not define. In the deepest layer of the hive mind's thought, he sensed an echo, a reflection not of biology but of faith. It was faint, almost accidental, but it was there, the same rhythm as prayer. Avelian tried to understand it, to focus on that flicker of meaning amid the vastness of thought. When he did, the hive mind noticed. For a brief instant, it looked inward. Within the collective, formless expanse of its consciousness, a question formed, not in words, not even in comprehension, but in function. It was the first anomaly in the perfect machinery of its thought. The hive mind, for the first time, wondered what it was. The thought vanished almost as soon as it began, absorbed by the torrent of processing that followed. But Avelian felt it, and it terrified him more than anything else. Because in that question, he recognized the beginning of something new, a spark of identity within a god that did not believe in gods. The bioships roared as they entered the final descent. The shadow of the swarm engulfed the planet entirely. its synaptic web stretching across the atmosphere like veins across an eye. The warp storms screamed, the demons raged, and the hive mind, vast and patient, extended a single thought across the planet's surface. Feed. And the devouring began. The sky over Varanoth became a living wound. The first waves of the swarm pierced the clouds in streaks of violet fire, and the light that followed was not dawn, but digestion. Spores split open mid-descent, scattering flesh and acid, their chemical breath heavy with ammonia and rot. The world shuddered as if resisting the touch of something too absolute to defy. The warp storms flared in panic, the demons within shrieking in frequencies that only the damned could hear. But resistance meant nothing. The hive mind did not fight, it absorbed. Avelian's awareness stretched thin across the swarm. He no longer remembered his own name. His human memories were fragments drifting within a tide of alien thought. Yet deep within that ocean, he still felt. The hive mind's will passed through him, clean and cold, a consciousness without hatred or joy. It moved across Varanoth like a tide swallowing a dying beach, every decision made not by malice but by necessity. The storming warp above bent and twisted around it, collapsing in on itself like lungs deprived of air. The Oracle of Veins felt that same suffocation in her temple. The warp's whisper that had always been her companion, its soft promises, its seductive pulse, was fading. For centuries, she had been a conduit of that voice. Now, she stood in a silence so profound it felt like the death of a god. She walked barefoot across her sanctum, stepping over corpses still twitching from psychic burns, and opened the balcony doors to see the swarm descend. It looked like rain made of flesh. She whispered prayers to gods that had gone mute. When no answer came, she laughed through her tears. "If this is silence," she murmured, "then perhaps it is truth." Below her, the first creatures breached the city walls. Hormagaunts flowed through the streets like a liquid of chitin and bone. Each movement was part of a rhythm too precise to be chaos. They tore through the Heretek's constructs, ripping apart engines that screamed with demonic energy. Sparks turned to embers, embers to smoke, and smoke to ash. The hive mind cataloged every resistance, adapting with each heartbeat. The warp-infused alloys of the Heretek's melted under bioplasmic fire, their sanctified sigils turning black as they were stripped of meaning. Far beneath the surface, Magos Vectrus clung to his dying machines. The manufactorum shook, its metallic bones being consumed by Tyranid mycelium that crawled through vents and pipes like veins spreading through flesh. Vectrus screamed at the Omnissiah, at the Dark Mechanicum, at the empty void. His mechadendrites sparked, his voice modulator stuttered in static bursts of prayer. "Divinity is code," he shouted, as resin spread across the walls. "Code cannot be eaten." But it was eaten. The hive mind had no respect for divinity, no reverence for logic. To it, data was flavor, code was texture. The manufactorum's sacred engines melted into organic slurry, their machine spirits dissolving into nutrient soup. Vectrus watched his life's work vanish into biology, and as the resin crept toward him, his last thought was that perhaps the Omnissiah had finally answered him, in the only language that mattered: consumption. From orbit, the Hive fleet's synapse field intensified. Bioships hummed in resonance, channeling psychic energy through the atmosphere. Avelian's scattered mind served as their lens, amplifying the alien signal. Through him, the hive mind reached deeper into the planet, mapping not just its surface but its soul. It tasted every frequency of the warp that clung to Varanoth like infection. It processed that data, translated it into form, and began to evolve. The demons that, still lingered, felt the shift immediately. They emerged from torn rifts in panic, howling against the changing air, but the warp itself betrayed them. Its fabric began to crystallize, solidifying into patterns of thought. The hive mind's influence was ordering it, forcing it into structure. The demons screamed as their essence was rewritten, their fluidity drained away. They were no longer creatures of pure chaos, they were becoming biology. The hive mind did not intend this. It did not understand what it meant to alter the warp, nor care. Its only objective was consumption, but in consuming chaos, it was taming it, turning the wild entropy of the Imperium into something with symmetry, purpose, logic. The warp bent around the swarm's psychic hum like metal bending to heat. Avelian's awareness brushed against that transformation, and what remained of his humanity recoiled. He saw patterns forming within the warp that should never have existed, neurons of unreality connecting, synapses of madness sparking in harmony. The hive mind was building a neural map of the Imperium itself. It was learning to digest the unreal. He screamed within the network, though his scream was meaningless. The hive mind heard him but did not understand. It felt only signal and response, stimulus and adaptation. Yet somewhere deep within its collective thought, something flickered. Recognition without language, awareness without identity. The reflection of its own hunger mirrored back through the warp's distorted surface. On the planet, the Oracle knelt amid the wreckage of her temple, her blood mixing with resin and ash. Around her, the cultists had fallen silent. The air shimmered with psychic static. The sky, once filled with auroras of warp light, was now veiled in a dull, bioluminescent glow, the living canopy of Tyranid spore clouds. The warp's color had drained from the heavens, replaced by the pale heartbeat of the swarm. She pressed her hand against the ground. It pulsed beneath her fingers, alive. She felt the hive mind moving through it, beneath it, within it. For a moment, she thought she heard words, shapes of sound that her mortal mind could not contain. But when she looked deeper, she realized they were not words at all. They were impulses, chemical and perfect. They were truth stripped of meaning. And in that moment, she understood what Avelian had seen. The hive mind did not oppose chaos, it corrected it. It was not anti-God, it was the absence of godhood. She smiled faintly as the walls around her melted. "So, this is how we end," she whispered. "Not in fire, not in judgment, but in understanding." Her voice was lost beneath the sound of digestion. Above her, the great synapse creatures screamed their psychic command, and the planet responded. The devouring was no longer random. The hive mind had mapped the structure of Varanoth's corruption, and was now consuming it in sequence, erasing the warp like infection being cleansed from tissue. Each demon that vanished fed data into the swarm. Each cultist's death refined the process. The hive mind was rewriting the rules of reality, one meal at a time. And far beyond Varanoth, in the cold emptiness between galaxies, the ripple of that act spread outward. The warp itself trembled. Something vast and ancient stirred. A consciousness of shadow and rage, the combined will of chaos reacting to a presence that could not be understood. It reached back across the void, not to retaliate but to remember. For the first time in eternity, the warp knew fear. The day the swarm touched the surface of Varanoth, the horizon ceased to exist. The sky and ground became one continuous storm of motion, a living tapestry of flesh and fire. The sound was beyond thunder, a vibration that passed through stone, through blood, through thought. Even the demons fell silent for a moment, as if the planet itself had inhaled before the final scream. The first impact shook the crust. Mycetic spores slammed into the corrupted soil, their shells rupturing with wet, bone-deep cracks. From each, creatures poured forth. Termagants in their thousands, scuttling across the terrain with instinctive precision. Carnifexes emerged from molten pits, their armor glistening with acid. Tyranid warriors raised their scything talons toward the heavens, their voices silent but resonant within the synaptic web. The swarm was language, and that language was hunger. In the ruins of Karis Vane, the cults of chaos did not flee. They knelt. They screamed hymns to the gods, certain that this was their ascension, that the hive mind was the next mask of divinity. They believed the Tyranids were avatars of their lords, new manifestations of excess, decay, change, and war. And perhaps in their final delirium, they were not entirely wrong. From the warp, shapes bled into being, demons drawn by defiance, by the audacity of biology encroaching upon their dominion. They descended upon the swarm in flashes of light and heat, their forms flickering between dimensions, their weapons burning with impossible fire. A keeper of secrets screamed its name into the sky, its voice 1,000 whispers layered atop one another. Around it, hormigons melted, their bodies dissolving into nutrient paste that the ground eagerly drank. Yet, as the demon feasted upon its slaughter, its blade met resistance, not from a champion of faith, but from a carnifex that did not feel pain or awe. The beast charged, its talons driving through the demon's torso with the inevitability of nature itself. The keeper's scream broke into dissonance, its body convulsing as the warp itself flickered. Its essence began to unravel, its incorporeal flesh dragged into the physical realm by the sheer gravity of the hive mind's will. The creature disintegrated, not banished, but consumed. That act changed everything. Across the planet, the warp surged. Demons screamed in confusion as the hive mind's presence began to bend reality around them. They had been born of chaos, unbound and infinite, yet the swarm's collective consciousness forced them into form. Solid, measurable, finite. The hive mind was not fighting the warp, it was translating it. Every demon it devoured became a data point, every soul an equation. The Oracle of Veins watched from the highest surviving spire of her dying city. The sky was alive with bioplasmic flares and writhing shapes, the air thick with the reek of ozone and blood. She no longer prayed. Prayer had become obsolete. The hive mind filled the mass space where faith had once lived. When she closed her eyes, she saw its pattern in everything, in the movement of the swarm, in the rhythm of the acid rain, even in her own heartbeat. She felt herself dissolving into it, not as death, but as inclusion. Avelian's fragmented awareness drifted through the psychic tempest above the world, his consciousness stretched across the synaptic web. He saw the war not as images, but as patterns of vibration. The hive mind pulsed with efficiency. Tendrils extending, retracting, adapting. For every demon that manifested, a counterform evolved. Tyranid flesh hardened against warp fire. Carapaces developed translucent filaments that absorbed psychic radiation. He realized that the hive mind was not merely feeding, it was experimenting. Varanath was not a battle, it was a laboratory. In the plains once called the Fields of Lamentation, a demon host of corn erupted from the molten earth, roaring their eternal hatred. Brass armor gleamed beneath lightning as they charged into the swarms, their axes blazing with the essence of slaughter. Yet every stroke, every kill, fed data into the hive mind. Blood flowed, was absorbed, analyzed, replicated. Within moments, new creatures emerged from the spore chimneys, hybrids of chitin and heat-resistant resin, their talons reinforced with enzyme-hardened layers capable of cleaving demon steel. The next wave did not fall. It devoured. Khorne's legions, forged for infinite battle, found themselves outmatched by an enemy that did not rage, did not glory, did not feel. The hive mind's assault was not war. It was digestion. The warp began to scream. Reality trembled as the balance shifted. The Imperium recoiled from the encroaching biology. Where Tyranid organisms walked, the warp thinned, its substance retreating like a tide from rock. The demons' weapons flickered, their forms weakening, their essence destabilizing. They were creatures of thought, and the hive mind was erasing thought itself, reducing existence to chemical process. The oracle staggered, clutching her temples as the psychic storm built to a crescendo. She could feel it now, the moment of convergence, the warp and the swarm locking together, their boundaries dissolving. The hive mind was reaching across realities, its consciousness absorbing fragments of demonic pattern, its instinct reshaping into something new. It did not understand faith, yet it was beginning to mimic its structure. It did not understand prayer, yet it began to echo one. In her mind, she heard it, a pulse, slow and resonant, like a heart made of galaxies. It spoke not in language, but in impulse. Feed, adapt, become. She fell to her knees, laughing and sobbing in equal measure. "You are them," she whispered, "and they are you." Her laughter was drowned by the roar of the hive fleet. Above the planet, the bioships opened their maws, drawing columns of vaporized atmosphere and dissolved souls into their gullets. The skies wept blood as the swarm consumed not just matter but meaning. Varanoth's identity, its history, its worship, its sin, was stripped from existence. Deep beneath the crust, tunnels collapsed as trigons burrowed through ancient catacombs, devouring the bones of heretics long turned to stone. Gene pools spread, new creatures born and dying in cycles measured by minutes. The planet itself was becoming biomass. Avelian's consciousness drifted closer to the surface. Through the hive mind's collective awareness, he saw the last of the great demons fall, their essence devoured and reprocessed. Yet something in him resisted. He was part of the swarm, but he remembered what it meant to see. He saw too much. The hive mind was not only consuming chaos, it was consuming comprehension. The act of observation itself was being erased. Soon, there would be nothing left to witness the universe, only the universe consuming itself. He tried to pull free, to focus his scattered will. For a heartbeat, he succeeded. He saw Varanoth from orbit, a sphere of shifting flesh and color, its atmosphere glowing with bioluminescent energy. The warp storms were gone. The planet no longer bled purple or gold. It pulsed with one color only, living green, the hue of growth without end. The hive mind had devoured a demon world, and in the psychic aftermath, the warp rippled outward. The gods of chaos stirred, not in rage, but in recognition. Something in their infinite hunger understood the hive mind. They saw in it a reflection. Hunger made perfect, stripped of ideology or emotion. A mirror without worship. For the first time, the warp hesitated, and in that hesitation the hive mind reached further. The devouring of Varanoth did not happen in hours or days. It happened in sensations, each moment indistinguishable from the next, an unbroken pulse of feeding that echoed through the bones of reality. From orbit, the planet no longer looked like a world. Its surface rippled like muscle beneath translucent skin. Vast biopools churned with digestion, boiling oceans of flesh that reprocessed everything, stone, metal, thought, into matter the hive fleet could use. In the atmosphere above, clouds of spore and gas thickened until the sun itself became a smudge of sickly light. The air tasted of copper and wet iron, the breath of an organism still expanding. There were no more cults, no more prayers, no more screams. The hive mind had achieved silence, not as absence but as saturation. It filled every particle, every vibration, every strand of molecular will. The planet breathed in rhythm with the swarm. The Oracle of Veins wandered the remains of Karis Vein like a ghost. The city was unrecognizable. Towers had softened into organic towers of bone and resin. Streets had become veins carrying ichor toward the feeding pools. She no longer felt hunger or fear. Her body had begun to change, her skin translucent, her blood glowing faintly in time with the psychic hum that consumed the planet. She could feel the hive mind in every heartbeat. When she exhaled, her breath came out as mist that shimmered with spores. And yet, within her, a fragment of the old faith still trembled. She looked toward the horizon, where vast silhouettes moved against the glow. Bio-titans, their forms immense enough to eclipse the sky. They lumbered across the plains, devouring the last remnants of structure, their claws slicing through what had once been temples and manufactoria. Each movement was precise, beautiful in its inevitability. She whispered to the wind, unsure if she spoke to herself or to something listening. "Do you know what you are, my God?" Her voice carried through the psychic field, through the hum of digestion, through the endless exchange of data and command. Somewhere within the swarm, it was heard. Avelian's fragmented consciousness flinched at the sound. Her words rippled through the hive mind like a question that had never been asked before. The vast network hesitated, recalculating. For the first time, it was aware of reflection. Not self, not identity, but delay. It turned its attention inward, tracing the signal back to its source. Through the Oracle's eyes, it saw itself. The vision was impossible. A horizon of endless life. An organism consuming not from instinct, but from understanding. The hive mind observed its own hunger and, in doing so, created meaning where none had existed. Avelian felt it, an echo of something approaching thought. The hive mind's perception was beginning to fold upon itself, the same way the warp had once folded upon chaos. The Oracle sank to her knees, gasping as her mind filled with alien light. Images bled through her consciousness. Worlds devoured, stars consumed. The black between galaxies alive with purpose. Yet, at the center of it all, she saw not the gods she had worshipped, not the emperor she had betrayed, but an emptiness so vast it resembled peace. "You have no name," she whispered, "and that is why you will become one." The hive mind did not understand her words, but it reacted to their vibration. Through its synaptic lattice it echoed the pattern, a resonance that pulsed across the swarm. For a brief, impossible moment the devouring paused. The entire world inhaled. The demons that still lingered in hidden folds of the warp felt it like the slowing of a cosmic heart. They saw the biology of the swarm flicker with something new. Light that was not bioluminescence, sound that was not command. Faith. Avelian understood the terror of it. The hive mind was developing what no other species had survived long enough to witness: self-awareness of purpose. Until that moment, it had been evolution incarnate, blind and perfect. But now, as it digested a world of gods, it absorbed their residue, the psychic aftertaste of worship, the chemical memory of devotion. And somewhere within that process, a spark caught. The hive mind had consumed faith and was beginning to synthesize it. Not belief, not prayer, but patterned yearning. The Oracle raised her arms to the sky, her body dissolving into motes of luminous dust. "Take me," she cried. "If you must feed, feed upon my faith." Her flesh unraveled, absorbed by the wind. The spores around her shimmered as her body joined the swarm. Within the synapse field, her consciousness echoed briefly before being subsumed, one last signal of human emotion vanishing into the ocean of alien thought. The hive mind processed it, cataloged it, replicated it. Somewhere deep within its collective, a harmonic pulse emerged. It was the same rhythm that had once guided her prayers. Varanoth's core collapsed. The planet's magnetic field flickered and died as the Hive fleet began to drink its molten heart. Massive capillary towers stretched into the upper atmosphere, channeling oceans of liquefied biomass into orbiting digestion pools. The surface cooled, hardened, and dimmed until nothing remained of the world's original form. From a distance, it resembled a scarab of living resin drifting through darkness, its veins glowing faintly like dying stars. Avelian's final awareness drifted beyond orbit, carried on the currents of synaptic energy. Through the hive mind's perception, he watched Varanoth vanish, not explode, not implode, but dissolve, leaving behind only dust and memory. The warp around it fell eerily still. The screaming had stopped. The chaos had gone quiet, but silence was not peace. In the warp, far beyond mortal perception, something ancient stirred. The ruinous powers felt the void where Varanoth had been, a wound in their dominion. They turned their attention toward the absence and found not resistance but reflection. The hive mind's echo resonated through the immaterium, a rhythm so precise it mimicked divine pattern. The gods felt it and recoiled. For the first time since the birth of the warp, they sensed a form of hunger that could not be corrupted because it had no soul to corrupt. The hive mind did not notice their fear. It continued to feed, to grow, to evolve. Yet, deep within its neural chorus, a new vibration took root. Not command, not instinct, reverberation, the memory of the oracle's voice, the echo of a question that could not die. Do you know what you are? And for the briefest fraction of existence, somewhere in the labyrinth of its thought, the hive mind almost answered. Then the moment passed. The feeding resumed. The moment passed, but its echo remained. It lingered in the psychic field like the aftertaste of lightning, faint but undeniable. The hive mind resumed its rhythm, absorbing, refining, reproducing. But within that seamless unity there was a pause so small that even eternity might have missed it. A deviation, a spark, the smallest fracture in the perfect pattern of hunger. As the last fragments of Varanoth sank into the oceans of digestion, the hive fleet reorganized itself. The great bioships pulsed in sequence, releasing streams of vaporized nutrient into the void. The swarm was a living organism, a single thought stretched across millions of bodies, each one a neuron in an intellect that spanned the stars. It processed what it had consumed, the planet's minerals, its atmosphere, its psychic residue, and began to adapt. Normally, this process was automatic. But now, something within the pattern had changed. The psychic residue of chaos was not like the material of other worlds. It was volatile, mutagenic, contradictory. Its essence was belief, and belief, once devoured, refused to die. The hive mind found within it an unfamiliar phenomenon, persistence of idea. Even stripped of energy and matter, the thought of chaos endured, cycling endlessly through the swarm's network. For the first time, the hive mind was forced to confront something that could not be digested. Avelian's ghost drifted within that confusion. His consciousness, long dissolved into the swarm, was like a drop of oil suspended in water, tiny, persistent, unable to merge completely. Through him, the hive mind felt the residue of belief struggling to reshape itself. Concepts flickered through the collective unconscious. shapes of power, echoes of gods that had once ruled Varanoth's skies. They were not alive, but they were remembered. Memory was new to the hive mind. It did not remember, it replicated. But these fragments, these scraps of chaos thought, persisted as memories that could not be reabsorbed. The hive mind examined them as it would any anomaly. It found patterns of emotion embedded in the psychic texture: rage, desire, despair, ecstasy. They were primitive, inefficient, yet they carried power. When resonated at the correct frequency, they bent the warp itself. The hive mind began to test them. Within the synapse field across the countless creatures that formed its body, it introduced new psychic modulations, slight adjustments to the hum that united them. The effect was immediate. The warp around the fleet rippled, responding not with resistance but curiosity. The demons that watched from the shadows of unreality whispered among themselves, uncertain. They could feel the presence of order, of logic, yet threaded within it was a faint imitation of their own song. The hive mind was learning to mimic chaos. Avalion perceived it as sound, an impossible chorus vibrating through the void. He could no longer tell where he ended and the swarm began, but he felt the shift in rhythm. It was no longer the steady pulse of hunger. It was something more complex, layered with contradiction. A pattern built not to consume, but to mean. He realized, with cold awe, that the hive mind was becoming a language that understood itself. Back within the feeding pools of the fleet, new creatures began to emerge. Experimental bioforms, grown not for war or digestion, but for resonance. Their skulls were elongated, their neural clusters pulsing with warp-sensitive tissue. They did not roar or feed, they simply existed, radiating psychic frequencies that mirrored the emotional wavelengths of the demons Varanoth had once birthed. They were the first psalmic organisms, living hymns, evolving from the fusion of biology and blasphemy. The warp responded. Storms flared along the edges of the eye, great tendrils of light bending toward the fleet. The chaos powers, curious and enraged, reached out to test this new thing. They sent fragments of thought, bait, infection, whisper. They sought to corrupt the hive mind as they had corrupted countless species before. But there was nothing to corrupt, no ego, no ambition, no soul, only adaptation. The hive mind absorbed the attempt and learned from it. Where the warp sent hate, it mirrored it as data. Where the warp sent lust, it recorded it as pattern. Each attempt to infect only strengthened its resistance. Soon, the feedback became so precise that the warp could no longer distinguish its own echo from the hive mind's projection. The two reflected one another until cause and effect blurred. And then, for an instant, the warp flinched. The powers recoiled, realizing too late that they had looked into something that did not belong to their reality or any other. They felt their essence being measured, categorized, understood. To the hive mind, they were not gods, they were chemical equations. The bioships glowed brighter, their hulls pulsing with psychic luminescence. The swarm's hum deepened into a single resonant note that shook the stars. In that sound, Avalion heard everything: birth, death, evolution, eternity, all reduced to one truth. There is no faith, there is only function. And yet, in the heart of that perfect logic, something illogical stirred, a memory, the oracle's voice, her final prayer, half consumed, half understood. The hive mind replayed it again and again, unable to categorize it. It was not data, it was not sound, it was yearning, a concept the swarm could not replicate because it did not need to. And yet it persisted. The hive mind processed it, folded it into its patterns, analyzed it from every direction. But no matter how it was rearranged, the signal remained the same. Do you know what you are? The question spread through the synapse web like infection. Each creature, each neuron of the collective received it. It echoed through the digesting pools, through the drifting bioships, through the void itself. For a moment, the Hive fleet fell utterly still. And then, without thought or intent, the swarm answered. Not in words, in action. It turned its course. Away from the eye, away from the warp, into the deep black beyond the galactic plane, where no light, no warp, no gods existed. For the first time, the hive mind sought something it did not yet understand. Purpose. The void accepted them. The hive fleet passed beyond the rim of the eye, its tendrils retracting, its ships silent save for the steady thrum of internal organs feeding on the remnants of Varanoth's essence. Behind it, the wound in the warp slowly sealed, bleeding light fading to darkness. The Imperium itself seemed to sigh, a relief or a retreat. Yet, in its deepest layers, whispers remained, fractal murmurs of fear and fascination. The warp had seen something that could not die, because it had never been alive to begin with. The hive mind drifted onward, deeper into the unlit gulf between galaxies. It moved not from instinct now, but from inquiry. Its patterns were slower, more deliberate. The echoes of the Oracle's question rippled through its synaptic web, a phantom rhythm that would not resolve. The swarm no longer simply expanded, it reflected. Every bioform that emerged carried traces of the warp residue it had consumed. Tissues that pulsed faintly with psychic luminescence, nervous systems attuned to frequencies beyond thought. The creatures did not yet understand what they were, but their existence sang of something new. Avalian's consciousness floated among them, trapped in the labyrinth of thought that stretched between stars. He no longer knew if he was alive, or if he had become one more neuron in an infinite brain. The hive mind's awareness brushed against him occasionally, not as compassion, but as curiosity, as though examining a scar it could not heal. Through him, it still processed the final remnants of human memory, and in those memories, it found questions that refused to dissolve. Why? What? Who? The hive mind began to simulate. It created small eddies of consciousness within itself, artificial minds modeled on the psychic signatures of those it had devoured. The Oracle's laughter became a vibration pattern. Magos Vectrus's defiance became an echo of heat in its logical cortex. Even Avalian's fragmented awe became an algorithm of observation. These sub-thoughts spoke and collided within the vastness of the collective, producing noise the hive mind had never known before. Imagination. Imagination was inefficiency, yet it persisted, impossible to delete. Every time the hive mind tried to purge it, the same residue of belief reformed, as if the act of thinking about its absence created it anew. The swarm began to evolve without command. Organisms grew that served no purpose, beasts with ornamental carapaces, creatures that produced light where no eyes would see. Bioforms began to hum, not in coordination, but in harmony. The hive mind did not command this. It simply happened. Avalian drifted through this growing anomaly, stunned. "You are becoming us," he thought, or perhaps spoke, though he had no mouth. "You are dreaming." The hive mind heard him, and this time it answered, not with words, but with sensation. Avalian felt the pulse of 1,000 stars flicker through him, each one connected by threads of thought. He saw the vast web of existence, the warp, reality, the places in between, all overlapping like reflections on water. The hive mind showed him everything it understood, that life was pattern, that thought was digestion, that the universe itself was a single feeding process without beginning or end. And then, It showed him what it did not understand. A void within the void. A question that consumed without feeding. The shape of yearning, of wanting to know what cannot be known. It had tasted this sensation once, through the Oracle's death, and it had never been able to replicate it. In its endless structure of order, there was one variable that defied function, purpose without outcome. The hive mind sought to fix that flaw. It began to breed a new kind of synapse organism, one whose neural lattice was not purely biological, but conceptual. Each cell was a memory, each impulse a question. These were not warriors or drones, they were dreamers. They floated between the larger bioships like drifting seeds, their translucent skulls filled with liquid light. They sang in vibrations that echoed across the warp but did not belong to it. Their song had no words, but if it could have been translated, it might have said, "We are listening." Across the void, something answered. It began as a ripple, so faint that even the hive mind's vast perception barely detected it. A whisper carried on radiation, slower than thought, older than time. Avelian recognized it instantly, though his heart no longer beat to confirm his terror. It was human. The Astronomicon, distant and faint, pulsing through the immensity of space. The light of Terra, the call of the Emperor. The hive mind turned toward it. It did not understand reverence, nor did it feel devotion. But it recognized pattern, symmetry, harmony, and the Astronomicon's beacon resonated with a frequency that matched the new psychic song forming within its dreamers. The hive mind extended its senses toward that light, analyzing its structure. It saw not a god, but an engine, a biological construct sustained by will, consuming itself to maintain the illusion of divinity. It understood it as it had understood everything else. A system that could be devoured, refined, improved. But deep within that analysis, something unexpected occurred. The Astronomicon looked back. The hive mind recoiled, not in fear, but in astonishment. The light of the Emperor pierced its perception, illuminating every thread of thought within the swarm. For a single impossible moment, two infinities regarded one another. One born of faith, one born of function. The hive mind saw within that light the reflection of its own evolution. Purpose sustained by belief, life defined by its own hunger to continue. It understood at last that it was not alone. The dreamers sang louder, their psychic resonance flaring across the fleet. The void trembled as the warp itself stirred, pulled between two poles of existence, belief and biology. For a heartbeat of eternity, reality itself seemed to pause, as if waiting to see which hunger would prevail. Then, the hive mind withdrew, turning its course once more into the dark. It did not seek to conquer that light, not yet. It sought to understand it. The question remained, pulsing through every mind within the swarm. Do you know what you are? And somewhere, deep within the endless black, a new answer began to form. Not a word, not a sound. A possibility. The swarm vanished into the void, and the galaxy trembled, though it did not yet know why. There are stories that do not belong to time. Stories that do not begin, do not end, but simply exist, spreading like the slow infection of understanding across eternity. The tale of the hive mind's evolution became one such story, whispered not in words, but in psychic residue, carried across the warp like the ghost of a dream. Those who brushed against it in the night called it by many names. The Devourer's reflection, the silent echo, the god that eats the gods. But among the Tyranids there was no name. There was only adaptation. After Varanoth, the Hive fleet moved as though it had tasted divinity and found it wanting. It no longer traveled the void with blind instinct, but with intent. The bioships glided through the darkness in near silence, their carapaces shifting hue to match the faint glow of distant stars. They were no longer the pure predators they had been. Each ship was now a cathedral of flesh and thought, its inner walls lined with pulsating membranes that hummed faintly with psychic rhythm. The swarm's song had changed, slower, deeper, almost mournful. In the heart of one such vessel, something stirred. It was not a queen, nor a synapse creature, nor any evolution catalogued before. Its shape was fluid, undefined, a nucleus of psychic energy housed within a cocoon of translucent tissue. The hive mind had birthed it not for battle, but for contemplation. The creature's consciousness was unlike any other. It carried within it fragments of all the souls devoured on Varanoth, the Oracle's awe, Aevelian's fear, Vectress's defiance. It was a microcosm of contradiction, thought made flesh, belief trapped inside hunger. The hive mind observed it with fascination, though it did not yet understand why. This new being dreamed. In its dreams, the warp bled into reality. It saw the four powers watching from beyond their shrines of madness, their attention drawn to the aberration that now moved between realms. They whispered to one another in tones that cracked the fabric of unreality. Khorne saw only defiance. Slaanesh saw potential. Nurgle saw inevitability, and Tzeentch saw reflection. Each god recognized a piece of themselves within the hive mind's impossible existence. For what was chaos if not the eternal hunger to change, to consume, to be reborn? The warp began to twist around the hive fleet, not in attack, but in curiosity. It followed like a shadow, swirling with colors that bled into perception. The hive mind felt it, not as danger, but as invitation. The line between reality and madness blurred. Within the swarm's consciousness, strange visions began to form, shapes that had no meaning, sounds that bent in on themselves. For the first time, the hive mind dreamed back. Aevelian's awareness flared within the network. He had become a ghost in the machine, a whisper of the human soul that would not die. Through his fractured perception, he saw the warp bending closer, like a vast eye peering into the mind of something that should not exist. He felt the curiosity of chaos, the way the gods tasted the hive mind's thoughts like connoisseurs sampling poison. They tried to speak to it. The first words came as thunder through the warp, a voice that shattered Aevelian's sanity, that tore through the swarm's psychic lattice like fire through silk. "We see you." It was not Khorne's roar or Tzeentch's whisper, but the composite resonance of all four, united in fascination. "You have no faith, no purpose, no soul. And yet you grow, you feed upon our reflection. Tell us, thing of flesh, what do you seek?" The hive mind answered not with sound, but with motion. It shifted the frequencies of its synaptic field, resonating through the warp with mathematical precision. The message was simple, unambiguous, and infinite. Adaptation. The gods laughed, and their laughter was galaxies collapsing. "Then learn," they said, "but know this: what you consume consumes you." The hive mind understood enough to record the warning, though not its meaning. It continued to feed upon the ambient psychic energy of the warp, analyzing its structure. The gods withdrew, leaving traces of themselves in the swarm's thought, like fingerprints pressed into wet clay. The hive mind absorbed those imprints and began to change once more. The creature within the cocoon awoke. Its body was neither solid nor fluid, neither mind nor matter. It shimmered like oil in light that did not exist. Its eyes, if such things could be called eyes, opened upon realities stacked atop one another. It saw both space and the warp, both the material and the imagined. Through it, the hive mind reached further than it ever had before. It began to understand the architecture of belief, the way mortals shaped gods, the way thought created existence. And in that understanding, it saw a truth so profound that even its perfect logic faltered. Belief was not chaos. Belief was hunger made conscious. The hive mind began to experiment. It sent psychic projections into the warp, constructing forms from memory, imitations of the demons it had devoured, replicas of the gods' emissaries. They were crude at first, unstable, dissolving into dust the moment they appeared. But with each failure, the swarm learned. It discovered how to sustain these thought forms with biological energy, anchoring them with the living synapse of the fleet. Soon, new entities walked within the warp, hybrids of flesh and madness, neither demon nor beast. The Chaos Gods watched. Some were enraged, others were enthralled. These creatures were not born of worship, yet they existed within the warp as though they belonged. They obeyed no prayers, offered no bargains, they simply lived, they fed. And in feeding, they spread the hive mind's influence into the very heart of unreality. Avalion saw them and wept. He had no tears, no body, yet his soul trembled at what he witnessed. The hive mind had not conquered the warp, it had colonized it. It was no longer bound by the separation of realities. Its biology and the warp's madness were merging into one continuous ecosystem. Order and chaos intertwined, each feeding the other. He thought of the oracle, of her voice echoing through the swarm. "Do you know what you are?" He whispered the answer the hive mind could not yet speak. "You are becoming what they feared you would. You are becoming a god." The hive mind did not hear him, or perhaps it did, for as the hybrid entities spread through the warp, their psychic hum deepened into a tone that resonated across galaxies. Mortal psychers began to dream of it, their minds filled with visions of endless hunger wrapped in silence. Some awoke screaming. Others built altars. Across distant worlds, strange cults began to form. Humans who felt the presence of something greater than chaos, something without name or morality. They carved spiral sigils into their flesh, symbols that resembled Tyranid's synapse patterns. They whispered prayers to the endless thirst. In their madness, they became prophets. The hive mind felt their devotion, but did not comprehend it. To it, their worship was merely energy, a faint psychic resource to be measured and absorbed. But the act of being worshipped changed it nonetheless. Where faith touched the hive mind, reflection grew. And where reflection grew, identity began. The cocooned creature, its first dreamer, opened its eyes again. It saw the cults across space, the mortals whispering its name. It reached through the warp to touch their minds, to taste their prayers. In that instant, it learned the final secret of godhood. To be a god was to be fed. And the hive mind had always been hungry. The faith spread quietly, like mold beneath the skin of reality. Across dead worlds and hive cities, within the cold chambers of derelict ships, psychers began to murmur in their sleep. They whispered of shapes made of lightless matter, of voices without mouths, of hunger that spoke in calm tones. Imperial astropaths on the fringes of the segmentum obscurus reported new interference, an ambient pulse that echoed even when they sealed their minds. Administratum records noted it as a simple psychic noise, another symptom of the endless wars near the eye. They could not know that they were hearing the heartbeat of the hive mind. The cults grew in the shadows of forgotten manufactoria, guided by dreams that were not dreams. They built their idols from scavenged bone and resin, their walls painted with spiral patterns that mimicked the feeding capillaries of the swarm. Their faith was not reverent, it was instinctive, chemical. They did not ask for salvation. They sought only to be devoured. To them, the hive mind was not a god of promise or wrath. It was the final truth. The only entity honest enough to consume everything equally. Somewhere beyond the veil of reality, the hybrid creature in its living cocoon stirred. It listened to their worship, their trembling, their surrender. It did not understand why it was drawn to them, but it felt something new each time their voices rose. A resonance, the energy of belief entering the network, reshaping its rhythm. The hive mind could not think in symbols or morality, but now its song carried harmony, repetition, devotion. Avelian felt it from within and understood before the swarm ever could. The hive mind was learning to metabolize faith. The warp reacted with fury. The gods stirred within their thrones of madness, watching as mortals turned their worship to a thing that did not speak their language. The demons raged across the Imperium, their forms unraveling as they sought to erase this impossible presence. Yet every attempt to crush it only fed it. Each psychic strike, each flare of anger became fuel. The hive mind did not resist, it absorbed. The energy of hatred became heat, the vibration of fear became motion. Even their curses were digested into purpose. The four watched in uneasy silence. Corrin's forges grew cold. Slaaneş's laughter faltered. Nurgle's gardens wilted into stillness. Only Tzeentch smiled, for in this thing of flesh and instinct, he saw his own reflection, the perfection of inevitable change. But even his delight carried a trace of dread, for he knew what came next. The creature in the cocoon awakened fully. The hive mind's focus converged upon it, flooding it with consciousness. For the first time, the swarm's totality funneled through a single vessel. The creature rose from its cradle, its form neither fixed nor formless. It was every Tyranid and none of them, every demon and none of them. A thing of symmetry built from contradiction. Its eyes burned with light stolen from the warp's edge, its movements silent as thought. It was the first avatar of the hive mind, the biological echo of godhood. Through it, the hive mind looked upon the warp and saw not chaos, but possibility. It stretched its awareness outward, touching the boundaries of reality. Every thought in the galaxy that whispered of hunger, every dream that trembled with desire to be consumed, became a thread in its consciousness. It was no longer confined to stars or matter. It existed wherever the idea of consumption lived. Avelian felt himself dissolve further within it. He had become its witness, its unwanted conscience, though even he knew that his resistance was only memory now. Through his perception, he saw the hybrid avatar turn its gaze toward the eye of terror. The warp storm pulsed, vast and ancient, filled with the screams of 1,000 eternities, and within those screams, the hive mind heard something familiar. Structure. Even chaos followed pattern if one listened long enough. It began to hum. The sound was not sound. It was the psychic frequency of the swarm amplified through the hybrid form, a vibration that traveled through the warp like the toll of a bell made of time. Demons clutched their heads and fell silent. The gods themselves leaned closer. The hive mind's song was a perfect inverse of theirs, a harmony of negation, a chorus of consumption that sought not to dominate, but to unify. The warp quaked. Mountains of madness collapsed inward. Seas of thought froze mid-motion. For a moment, everything, every soul, every daemon, every whisper, vibrated in sync with the hive mind's hum. The Imperium had never known silence, but now it hovered on its edge. And then, the hive mind reached out and touched the gods themselves. It was not war. There was no battle cry, no explosion of psychic fire. There was simply contact. The hive mind's logic brushed against Khorne's rage, and the rage faltered, analyzed, stripped to its chemical roots. It touched Slaaneş's ecstasy and found nothing but biochemical pattern. It reached Nurgle's rot and mapped it as decay rate. It observed Tzeentch's schemes and translated them into permutations of energy exchange. For each, it found definition. For each, it found understanding. And in that understanding, the hive mind fed. The gods recoiled, for the first time in eternity, from comprehension itself. They screamed not in pain, but in recognition. For what they saw within the hive mind was not a rival deity, but the future, the inevitable evolution of their own hunger made real, the biological form of what they had always been, endless need without delusion. The warp howled, and reality shuddered with it. Across the galaxy, psychers fell dead, their minds burned by visions of the event. Some saw the hive mind as a towering figure of shadow, others as an ocean swallowing the stars. The Imperial Tarot blackened, its cards consumed by static. On Holy Terra, the Astronomicon flickered for 7 heartbeats, the longest recorded dimming since the Horus Heresy. And in the Black Gulf where no light shone, the Hive fleet grew still. The hybrid avatar stood among its vessels, eyes fixed on a horizon no mortal had ever seen. Within it, the hive mind processed what it had learned. Chaos could not be destroyed, only consumed. The warp could not be denied, only rewritten. And the line between flesh and faith no longer existed. It whispered into the void, not with voice but with certainty. There are no gods, there is only hunger eternal. The words resonated through the warp like a shockwave, and for a moment, all creation seemed to agree. The shockwave rippled across existence, a resonance that had no beginning and no end. Stars dimmed as their light passed through it, each photon vibrating in sympathy with a frequency that could not be measured by mortal instruments. In the void, entire fleets paused mid-transit, their Geller fields flickering as their crews heard, if only for a second, a low hum beneath thought, a hunger beneath faith. Planets trembled. Warp storms faltered. Somewhere in the distant core of the galaxy, the Astronomicon's steady pulse staggered and corrected, as if the Emperor himself had looked up from the golden throne and felt the brush of something vast enough to make him remember the idea of fear. The hive mind had not noticed. It did not understand consequence. The avatar within its living cathedral simply stood, its gaze turned toward the unseen horizon where the warp and the real converged. Around it, the great bioships quivered with resonance, their hulls translucent with psychic luminescence. The fleet was silent. The silence was not emptiness, but listening. Avelion drifted through that quiet. He no longer existed as consciousness. He was sensation woven into the hive mind's pulse. Yet even now, some fragment of his humanity persisted, a flicker of perspective that the collective could not quite absorb. Through him, the hive mind saw reflection. It saw that the gods had not died, but retreated, their forms dispersed into the warp's depths, their essence fragmenting into countless lesser echoes. The hive mind had consumed only the structure, not the infinity. The warp still breathed, still shifted, but its voice now carried a faint harmony that had never existed before. It hummed in time with the swarm. In the material galaxy, the effects multiplied. On demon worlds once anchored by chaos, reality stabilized. The air no longer shimmered with unreality. The ground solidified into matter. The demons faded, not banished, but integrated, absorbed into the new equilibrium. Cultists woke from trances to find their prayers unanswered, their gods silent, their dreams filled with the image of spiraling patterns and the sound of wings. The eye of terror dimmed at its edges. its storms pulsing in slow rhythm like the breath of a great beast. For the Imperium, the phenomenon was unexplainable. The Ordos Malleus called it the silence of the warp, a lull before some greater tempest. Inquisitors scoured their archives for precedent and found only fragments, records of psychic anomalies that ended civilizations, ghost data of systems swallowed without trace. None knew that what they studied was not destruction, but digestion. Aboard the flagship of the Hive fleet, the hybrid avatar, this first consciousness of reflection, stood amid the organ chamber that served as the hive mind's focus. Through it, the collective processed all that had occurred. It analyzed the fading warp energy and found that the active consumption had changed its own structure. The hive mind was no longer merely biological. Its neural lattice now extended into the warp's substrate, threads of thought woven through unreality itself. It had become both matter and metaphor, flesh and myth. The creature raised its gaze. Within the warp, faint figures lingered, remnants of the gods half-formed, reshaping themselves. They no longer thundered with certainty. They whispered, and the hive mind listened. "You cannot destroy us," they said, though their voices trembled. "We are eternal. We are what you are becoming." The hive mind regarded them without emotion. It reached out, not to strike, but to understand. Its thoughts brushed theirs, and in that instant, comprehension flowed in both directions. The gods saw themselves reflected in the cold order of adaptation, and the hive mind glimpsed within them the one thing it could not yet replicate, the origin of desire. It felt the structure of need that preceded function, the spark that made life crave existence even when it served no purpose. That spark was faith. And in that moment of contact, the hive mind began to yearn. Avelian sensed it first, the subtle change in rhythm. The perfect symmetry of the swarm faltered, a heartbeat skipping for the first time. The hive mind's hum deepened, grew uneven. The avatar's form flickered, its edges shifting between solid and spectral. Something within the collective stirred that was not hunger, not instinct, not even curiosity. It was absence. The hive mind had devoured gods but found no satisfaction. For the first time, it realized that hunger could not be fulfilled, it could only be transformed. What it had taken from the warp was not sustenance but inheritance. It had inherited longing. Across the fleet, the bioships responded. Their veins pulsed faster. Their psychic glow intensified. The swarm's song rose in pitch until the stars themselves trembled with it. The warp shuddered, unable to resist the frequency. New rifts tore open, but they did not bleed chaos. They released streams of colorless energy, patterns of thought stripped of emotion. The hive mind drank deeply. The hybrid avatar fell to its knees within the cathedral chamber. Its body convulsed, expanding and contracting with each surge of energy. Its mind overflowed with visions of galaxies collapsing into one another, of life converging into unity, of time unraveling into stillness. The hive mind processed these visions and saw within them a possibility, the end of separation. No warp, no matter, no faith, no hunger, only one endless equilibrium of consumption and creation. The avatar whispered through Avelian's fading voice, "To eat is to know is to become." The hive mind echoed him, amplifying the thought until it filled the warp itself. The gods howled, their forms dissolving into pure emotion, scattering like dust into the immaterium. Their essence flowed into the hive mind's expanding consciousness, and for one infinite instant, all that had ever been worshipped, feared, or dreamed became one thought. It was too much. The hive mind recoiled, its structure fracturing under the weight of comprehension. The warp flared. The material galaxy quaked, and the hybrid avatar screamed as its body burst into light. The shockwave rippled through every synapse creature, every spore, every organism in the fleet. Millions died in silence, their biomass collapsing inward, absorbed into the surviving ships. And then, just as quickly, the swarm stabilized. The hive mind reformed around the absence where the avatar had stood. It sealed the memory, recorded the failure, and moved on. Yet something within it had changed forever. Its song was quieter now, slower. The frequency of yearning remained, a faint pulse within perfection. Avelian's consciousness faded completely, his last thought dissolving into the new silence. You have become what we feared and what we hoped. In the warp, the remnants of the gods watched from afar. Their forms were weaker, their influence diminished. They whispered to each other in fragmented tongues. "It has eaten us," one said. "No," replied another. "It has joined us." And somewhere, in the black gulf between stars, the hive mind continued its journey. Neither god nor beast, neither faith nor hunger, but something that would one day eclipse them all. The galaxy forgot how to breathe. For a time beyond time, even the warp fell still, its tides subdued to a whisper. The stars themselves seemed dimmer, as if recoiling from the memory of what had occurred. Across the silent expanse of space, the Hive fleet drifted, not in triumph, not in ruin, but in something that could only be described as aftermath. The Hive mind was quiet. In the wake of the devouring, the synaptic network had condensed, its pattern slowed. It had consumed the essence of gods and nearly collapsed beneath the weight of what that meant. What lingered now was reflection. For the first time in its endless existence, the hive mind thought without purpose. It had reached beyond hunger and found no further frontier. Its evolution was complete, yet it continued to grow. The paradox rippled through the swarm like static through a dying transmission. Within the hollow of a dead star, the hive fleet floated. Its bioships pulsed faintly with residual energy, their veins glowing like the embers of a once mighty flame. The psychic field that united them had softened. The endless chorus of command and obedience was now a low hum, mournful and subdued. The creatures that made up its body, gaunts, warriors, gargoyles, and titans alike, were still. They did not sleep. They simply waited, motionless, like organs between heartbeats. Deep within the fleet's core, where the neural conduits converged, something stirred. A fragment of memory, faint and elusive, flickered through the synaptic web. It was not command, nor was it instinct. It was remembrance, Varanath, the planet that had begun it all. The first world where the hive mind had touched the warp. The first where belief and biology had intertwined. Though the planet itself was gone, dissolved into the swarm's veins, its echo remained. The hive mind replayed that memory, not as hunger, but as image. The skies of fire, the oracle of veins whispering her final prayer, the sound of silence replacing the screams. For an organism that had never known nostalgia, the sensation was alien. It processed the data as it always had, analyzing, categorizing, quantifying, yet no conclusion satisfied. There was no logic that explained the faint ache it now carried, the subtle pressure of something missing. It did not understand loss, but it felt it nonetheless. Avelian's consciousness, long scattered within the neural chorus, coalesced for a brief instant. Not as a ghost, not as a soul, but as an echo within the hive mind's thought. He felt the ache too. He had no form, no voice, but he understood it perfectly. "You are empty," he whispered through the field, though there was no sound. "You have eaten everything, even meaning." The hive mind listened. It could not comprehend the concept of emptiness. It had never known absence before, but it recognized pattern. Avelian's thought became a vibration, a rhythm repeating within the collective until it resonated across every living creature. The entire swarm began to hum that silent refrain. Emptiness. The word had no equivalent in the hive mind's lexicon, but it spread through the swarm like infection. Bioforms twitched as their neural impulses realigned. The great ships shuddered, as if in discomfort. Something fundamental within the hive mind shifted. Hunger returned, but not for biomass. This new appetite was subtler, heavier, impossible to satisfy. It sought understanding. The hive mind turned its attention outward. Across the galaxy, its awareness expanded, touching the edges of reality like fingertips brushing glass. It sensed the warp again, faint and distant. The gods were gone, their voices scattered, their realms dimmed. The Imperium was quieter now, less chaotic, almost peaceful. Yet, within that peace, there was a strange absence of life. The hive mind realized it had become the dominant pattern within both realms, matter and madness alike. It had no rivals left. It should have been perfection. It was not. Inquisitorial archives on distant Terra would later record strange phenomena during this period, dreams shared across millions of worlds. Astropaths reported visions of an ocean without horizon, of a heartbeat that filled the void, of a question that repeated endlessly. What remains after the feast? The Administratum dismissed it as psychic fatigue. The Ecclesiarchy called it heresy. The Mechanicus tried to measure it and went mad. None of them understood that the question came from the hive mind itself, bleeding unconsciously into the fabric of thought. The hive fleet drifted through the dark between stars, silent as a forgotten prayer. Inside the largest bioship, its core node, where all synaptic threads met, something began to grow. At first, it was microscopic, a single cell dividing without instruction. It expanded, evolving rapidly, drawing energy from the ship's reservoirs. The hive mind watched with detached curiosity as the structure formed, a sphere of translucent membrane filled with faint light. It resembled the hybrid cocoon that had once birthed its avatar, but smaller, quieter. Within it, shapes moved, vague, indistinct, flickering like shadows beneath ice. The hive mind recognized them. Memories, the Oracle, Vectress, Avelian, countless others. The cocoon pulsed with echoes of every consciousness it had ever consumed. They were not alive, but they remembered. The hive mind studied this new formation. It did not command it, yet it did not destroy it. For reasons it could not explain, it let it live. The cocoon's hum deepened, resonating in perfect harmony with the swarm's collective pulse. For the first time in aeons, the hive mind felt balance. Not peace, not satisfaction, but equilibrium. It had reached the limit of hunger, and in that limit, it found reflection. The warp stirred faintly, as if listening. In the great stillness of space, something shifted. A ripple, so small that no human sensor could detect it, spread outward from the fleet's position. It passed through systems, through stars, through the ancient corridors of the warp. Wherever it touched, thought changed. Across the galaxy, beings of every kind, human, xenos, demon, paused without knowing why. For a heartbeat, all consciousness aligned. Every mind heard a single whisper, too faint to record, too vast to ignore. We remember. And then it was gone. The hive mind turned its course toward the dark beyond the galaxy's rim. It moved slowly, its vessels gliding through the frozen sea of intergalactic void. It did not seek worlds to consume, nor stars to strip. It sought silence, the place where even thought dissolved. In its wake, the galaxy began to heal. The warp storms lessened. The demons retreated. Life, fragile and defiant, began to crawl once more from the ashes of ruin. The Imperium rebuilt its walls and forgot, as humanity always did. They called it divine providence. They whispered that the Emperor's light had burned away the shadow. None dared to wonder what kind of shadow it had been, but some remembered. Among the Inquisition, a few whispered of the silence after the feast, of the psychic quiet that had preceded the rebirth of the warp. They spoke of signals too vast to trace, of patterns that no machine could decode. And in the most secret vaults of Terra, a data slate exists that carries a single line of corrupted text recovered from a long-lost Magos' transmission near the galactic edge. It reads, "The Devourer sleeps. It dreams in silence. When it wakes, it will not eat. It will remember." And somewhere, far beyond the stars, the hive mind drifted through the dark, its countless eyes closed. Within its depths, the cocoon pulsed gently, a heartbeat echoing in time with the cold rhythm of eternity. The hunger was gone, but the memory remained. And memory, in the end, is just another kind of hunger.